Hey everyone, today we're going to look at a note-taking technique called Progressive Summarization and at the principles behind it. It was created by Tiago Forte, and with it you're going to learn how to create useful notes without having to invest loads of time up front. So, let's get started. When we consume information, we often feel like we want to remember it, but what we actually want to do is apply it when it becomes directly relevant. And we simply think that remembering the information is the best way of achieving that. However, there is a gap between learning something in theory and applying it in practice. And the gap is that we don't always know what will be the most important pieces, because we don't know the exact circumstances under which we will be applying it. And unfortunately, we cannot simply remember everything because memorization is a costly process. So, what would be useful for us to do would be repackaging the information in a way that would increase its usefulness in the future. To do that, we need to engage in some kind of summarization. Otherwise, the next time we look up the resource, it will be as if we never touched it. Therefore, we engage in two balancing acts. The first one is balancing our learning self against our applying self, or our exploring self against our exploiting self. First of all, we never really want to do anything where the future value is uncertain. That's why our learning self doesn't really want to invest time into making notes only to never look at them again. But by the same token, our applying self doesn't want to reread whole articles, not to mention books, only to find that the information there is not relevant to the problem that our applying self is dealing with at the current moment. So, we need our summarization process to be smooth and effortless enough not to overwhelm our learning self and prevent it from doing it, but we also need the summarization process to be effective enough to transform the resource in a way that makes it easy for our applying self to quickly assess whether the resource is useful and relevant and helps it actually take the information from there and apply it to the problem at hand. The second balancing act is about discoverability versus understandability. So discoverability is about compressing the original resource into a form that is easy to review, easy to assess whether it's relevant, and also easy to use. So here you are actually trying to sell your applying self on the idea of using the note. So here it's actually very useful if you can use clickbaity headlines for your notes. Understandability, on the other hand, is about preserving the original context of the resource that you are summarizing. I'm sure that has happened to you that you read a book or listened to a podcast and you took some notes, but when you returned to those notes after some time, after a couple of weeks maybe, you didn't really understand what the notes meant. You lost the original context, you compressed them too much, and it was no longer understandable enough for your applying self when it returned to it after some time. So to retain understandability, we are trying to retain the original context as much as possible, which is of course in contrast to the compression to the discoverability. So that's what this balancing act is about. Now, progressive summarization helps us manage both of these balancing acts at the same time with minimum effort. So it helps us balance our learning self against our applying self, as well as understandability against discoverability. So let's look at how exactly it works. Well, as the name would suggest, progressive summarization is essentially about summarizing the resource, then summarizing the summary, then summarizing that summary, and so on. But the key principle here is being opportunistic. We only want to make each summarization step when we are reviewing the note anyway. So as a side note, it is helpful to have a system for reviewing the notes like this. But for now, you only need to remember that we only make each summarization step while we are using the note anyway, and in this way, each step naturally builds on the previous one. So now let's look at all the steps or layers, as Tiago calls them, in order. The first layer is highlighting and export. This is really just highlighting what you find interesting or valuable while you are reading the resource, and then exporting those highlights into your note managing software of choice. Now, with digital resources like ebooks or web articles, this can be made extremely simple and even automatic if you throw in tools like Readwise into the mix, and I will make a video how to set up such an integration. But whatever tools you use, what's important is really to just make the highlights and then export them into your note management software, because these highlights will then serve as the basis of the whole progressive summarization process. And one of the things this means is that it's also better to usually highlight whole sentences or even paragraphs so that the context is preserved, as we covered previously. For layers 2 and 3, first select whatever two text formatting options you like. Tiago suggests bolding and highlighting. I prefer underlining instead of bolding, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you first use one of these options for marking down the best passages of what you just imported, and then you use the second one to mark down the best of the best, the truly unique and valuable ideas. And when you're summarizing and compressing the text like this, make sure you don't fall for the trap of just compressing sentences into phrases and phrases into single words, but actually try to choose 3 best ideas out of every 5 and then selecting one very best idea out of those 3. Now, the next layer, layer 4, is summarizing. And it's for the notes that have been proved already very useful because we are clearly using them quite often. And these notes have earned themselves the right for a short executive summary. This summary should definitely be written in your own words, not just copying what the author of the original resource used, because that also helps you remember it even more and makes it even more understandable for yourself. So layer 4 is written summary. And finally, layer 5, it's maybe not even exactly a layer, because you might sometimes do it even before you do layer 2, because layer 5 is remixing, and remixing is for the cream of the crop of all the resources that you find. Layer 5 is for those ideas and concepts that you want to integrate into your own thinking as fast as possible. Layer 5 is you taking what you just read and using it in your own creative projects. Ideally in projects where you are actually explaining the ideas to others. A little hint, this video is me actually remixing progressive summarization and using it as a content for my own video to really help me integrate it. So layer 5 is about that, and of course it doesn't need to be videos, it can be blog posts, it can be infographics, it can be whatever you enjoy making and whatever helps you learn. So these are the 5 layers or steps of progressive summarization, and again, we only ever progress to the higher layer when we are using the note anyway, when we are paying attention to it anyway. And to sum up, the first layer is highlighting and exporting into your note management software. Layers 2 and 3 are about progressively compressing the exported highlights. They are about selecting the best of those highlights and then the best of the best. Layer 4 is you making your own executive written summary. in your own words, and the pseudo layer 5 is you remixing the note and using it in your own creative project. Now, when you start progressively summarizing notes like this, a couple of things will happen. First, you will naturally start paying more attention to those notes that are actually the most useful, because as we've outlined, the progressive summarization builds with each step on the previous step. So this very naturally guides you towards the most useful resources and actually paying more attention and energy only to those that have proven to be the most useful to you. Second of all, by creating all these layers, you naturally solve the balancing act between discoverability and understandability, because you unlock the option to just choose between several possible ratios of discoverability to understandability. By preserving all these layers in context in one place, you can just zoom in to whatever level of detail you need for the task at hand. And finally, the third benefit that you unlock with progressive summarization is that you can stop worrying about trying to remember everything, because you know that everything that you might want to use is there, stored in a system that you can trust, and it's ready for you to be used whenever you use it, while helping you learn the things that you are really using, the things that are really useful for you. So with this, you unlock the power of your mind to just focus on whatever is in front of you. So there you have it, my video summary of Tiago Forte's progressive summarization. I highly recommend checking out the original articles by Tiago. The link will be in the description, because Tiago is really the GOAT of personal knowledge management. And please let me know what you thought about the video in the comments, and if you liked it, please also like and subscribe, because that's by far the best way to help me make more content like this. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.